Hey everybody, I want to talk a little bit about something that doesn't always get a lot of airtime, and that is waiving fees. When to do it, when not to do it, under what circumstances, the math behind it, a little bit about the ethics around it, and the absolute necessity to do it before clients ask for it. So let's jump in. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about proactively waiving a half or all of 1 month's fees under certain circumstances. And every once in a while, maybe more than that. But mechanically, that is extending your end of contract date by a month if possible. That's not always possible, but in either case, it's foregoing 1 month's fees or half of a month's fees. So why do this? There are three triggers that I've found. So the first is actually a fairly obvious one. We failed. Completely stepped in it, screwed it up, just royally messed something up. We've all been there, and we've been there. So the second one is we put the client through the ringer, just for a variety of different pathways to get to this one, but we really put them through it. But then there's the last one, and you can see that I've bracketed these three into two sort of gross categories. But the third one's interesting, and that one you've got deep conviction about something that you might want the client to do or experience, and we'll get into all three. So triggers 1 and 2, I bucketed these up specifically because they are related. But these are things that, yeah, we failed, put them through the ringer, but you got to do it. It's a make good. It's restitution. Okay. So some examples, and again, these are relatively obvious, but maybe the client isn't realizing the gains that were promised. They're not seeing the outcomes. They're not experiencing the thing that they were led to believe they were going to experience by working with you. Maybe there are repeated errors in the work product itself. And I want to draw a distinction between simple errors or mistakes to something that's more chronic or ongoing, repeated errors that have been flagged and talked about. Efforts have been made to stamp it out, but it's still happening. And I don't want to minimize quote unquote simple mistakes. Depending on your clients and your industry, a simple mistake could be catastrophic, depending on what you're doing. So I don't want to suggest that like a typo or a miscalculation in a 50 slide deck isn't something that rises to the level of great import for you and your clients, by no means. But actually, that could also just fit in this category too, if that's where you find yourself in your business. But maybe there are ongoing communications issues, or there's other ongoing problems that have just gone uncorrected. So despite efforts, something is it's persisting. It's a chronic issue that hasn't been resolved. Or maybe repeated delays, like we've promised the thing, the client hasn't gotten the thing, they were led to believe they were gonna get it, more time goes by, they still don't have the thing, and it's beyond reasonableness, and something quote unquote needs to be done. And then we put them through the ringer. This is a classic one, at least in agency life, where there's an unreasonable number of team changes. Been there too, where by one mechanism or another, you've got to go back to the client and explain something you really don't want to explain, which is got to make another change on their project. Okay, so we can either be reactive or proactive in this. And I wanted to just draw that distinction because it's the same dollars foregone either way. If you're going to waive fees, let's say a month fees, whether you're reactive or proactive, if the client accepts your offer, you're out the same amount of money. But reactive, they might feel a different way about it. So that way they might be like, cynical agency trying to save their hide. It's going to feel a little bit like a bribe. And if you're in that situation, you hope they take it. Maybe you want to keep this client. But if you're proactive, you're out the same dollars, but if you're proactive, it might land differently and it might speak to integrity. The clients might be angry either way, but it's going to feel different if you're reacting to them coming at you versus you bringing something to them. So let's get into a couple examples. Imagine that you're swapping out a strategist for the third time in 9 months. Something nobody wants, right? Yes, is it a part of agency life? We can say that, but it's going to hurt the client, always does. And they don't like it. So let's look at a couple approaches. So let's say Billy gave you 2 weeks notice. What do you do? So the first approach is you jump on the phone, and your team hasn't figured it out yet. They might not even know who they're going to backfill Billy with. All that's still being sorted out, but you are proactive. You go to the client and you go to them and say, hey, something's about to go down. I know you're not going to like it. And in that conversation, you offer to waive a month's fees. Approach B, you let your team notify the client and sort it all out. So, hey, you guys figure it out and come back to me with who's going to staff this project, who's going to backfill Billy. They got to go to the resource forecast. They got to look at the staffing sheet, whatever it is. And then 2 days before Billy's last day, then you call the client and offer to waive a month of fees. Now, the client might not be happy either way. In both cases, the client hasn't come to you. You've gone to the client in either case. And they're probably not going to be happy, but which one do you think is going to soften the blow the most? Let's look at another example. So this one, the client's not getting performance. And certainly if you're an SEO agency, you have probably experienced this, but if you're in another type of B2B service, there might be an analog to what you do that might feel familiar. So approach A is, let me back up. So if you're not familiar, so this is a case where you're shipping recommendations to a client and in a situation where you're not directly implementing those changes on the client's website. So you're often dependent upon the client to take your recommendations and do something with them, either type up or generate a finished piece of content to implement, or maybe there's something technical in the website you need them to do. Whatever it is, there's a series of recommendations that are starting to back up. For whatever reason. There's a number of reasons, but let's say the client hasn't been implementing these things. What's the problem with that? If you don't implement the stuff, you don't see the results. Your performance doesn't improve. And oftentimes this could be something that your team is aware of, and maybe their day-to-day point of contact that the client is aware of, but let's say the big boss, the VP, is unaware of this, okay? So approach A is you discover it, and you pick up the phone and you tell her immediately. It's like, hey, here's what's going on. I just found out your team hasn't been implementing stuff. Here's the problem. You're not going to see the performance. We haven't seen the performance. And so I want to waive a month's fees. And maybe you can use those fees to expand the scope of your freelancers so they can work down this growing backlog. Okay. And maybe it's a situation where the VP didn't realize this. She's busy. She didn't realize, she didn't know that. It's not bubbling up. Bad news travels slowly at your client too, not just in your own shop. So maybe she didn't know this, and she hasn't discovered that performance wasn't where she needed it to be. Approach B, you let it ride. And maybe you say, hey, look, the client isn't implementing, and it's a client problem. My people are fulfilling their side of the statement of work. They're shipping this stuff as promised. And if the client isn't implementing it, then they're not getting the performance, that's on them. So you don't do anything. But eventually, you get that scathing email from the VP asking why organic leads are down. She doesn't realize it's because of this backlog problem. She's just looking at the chart. The chart's not going up and to the right. It's flatlined or even declining. And she comes in hot. So you respond, explain it all, and then offer to waive a month's fees to do the same thing. Get the freelancers, work down the backlog. Either way, again, the client might not be happy, but which approach might lead to the blow being softened a little bit? Okay, you get it. But now let's talk about trigger number 3. So this is separate from the other two. This is where you have high conviction about something. Maybe you see an opportunity, but the client is hesitant. So what could that look like? Maybe it's a one-time effort to do something, like maybe fixing or leveling up analytics and attribution or tracking, something like that. Again, if you're in the agency space, that might seem familiar, where you're trying to do your best efforts and show your ROI on SEO or whatever it is, but you don't have the reporting you need because no one trusts the data. So maybe you're just like, goodness, can't we just fix this one-time effort? Let's get over the hump. Another one could be to build out an asset that you know will help the client, even if the client can't see it yet. And it depends on what that is. Again, in the agency context, maybe that's that killer lead magnet that you've been trying to get the client to build so that you can use as part of your strategy. But for whatever reason, maybe it's budget, maybe it's whatever it is, or just priority. They love it, but they just can't prioritize it or whatever. Maybe we can divert a month's fees to hire a freelancer or get the dev on board or whatever that might be, or bring in a creative agency to blow it out and get it done. You've got high conviction, the client, for whatever reason, can't get there. Maybe there's tooling, training, other consultants, whatever it is, depends on your business context. But the last one is also something I want to highlight, which is maybe there's another service that you offer that the client's balked at. I don't know, this, that, whatever. You know, if they just experienced it, saw it, tried it, they'd see the ROI from it, and then they might want to get budget for it. So you say, you know what? I'm going to take a month of my fees and I'm going to shift it over to these people. Now, the part that's interesting about that, now you're not waiving anything necessarily. You're just shifting internal dollars from one division to another division inside the same company. So that's an interesting one to think about. If only the client saw it, the client might engage you for it. So this can also be a pathway to an upsell. Okay, so you do it because it's the right thing to do, full stop. Certainly triggers 1 and 2. But it turns out the math is on your side, and it's also useful to keep your wits about you, right? And this is where there's a little ethical thing here. So if it's the right thing to do, then who cares about the math, right? But there might be circumstances where even when it's the right thing to do, it's still good to have the context about what it'll do to your business. And every once in a while, the right thing to do might be to take another path altogether, and I'll get to that in a minute. So let's go through the math a little bit. And the setup here is, does the gesture of waiving fees pay off? Let's look at a $120,000 a year client, classic $10K a month, 20% margins, 3-year average tenure. So the lifetime value is $72,000. If you think by waiving fees, there's a better than 14% chance they're going to stay versus if you didn't waive the fees, you should do it. Now, you might say, Larry, you just said do the right thing no matter what. And that's right. And even if you're like, yeah, I don't know, if I can waive the fees, I think they're going to churn if I do nothing at some likelihood. And if I waive the fees, they're still probably going to churn. You probably should still waive the fees, maybe. But you should think about it, because this is a business. Let's dig in a little bit deeper. It turns out you can chart a horizon of outcomes between the net margin on that specific account that you're considering and the sort of average client tenure. So you could think about it as, I get 10% or 15 or 20% net margins on this particular account versus let's say a client's been with me for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. Let's say the average tenure is 3 years, but you have a 5-year client where you're making really good margins. I'm getting 20% margins on this client. They've been here forever. Let's say you screw it up somehow, right? And it's bad. You want to go back to that client. What this table says is if there's a 8% lift on the client staying if I waive the fee versus me doing nothing, I'm going to waive the fee, right? Again, do the right thing. The right thing to do is waive the fees. The math is just backing you up, which means 8%, sure, you're probably going to clear that hurdle every time. And again, what that means is if I do nothing, the client's going to stay with some likelihood. If I waive this fee, there's a higher likelihood they're going to stay. And what's that delta? If I can clear 8% in my gut, I think there's more than an 8% lift in me doing this versus not. Yeah, I'm going to waive the fee. We're going to do it anyway. This just backstops your gut. Now, the way to think about that break even, I have the equation there at the bottom, and I have the derivation of that equation in the appendix here. But look carefully at that equation, and what you'll see is in the table is that the higher the net margin and the longer the tenure, the lower the break even point. Another way to thinking about that intuitively is, yeah, you waive the fee. Long-time client, you're making a lot of margins. Yes, you do it. It's the right thing to do, and it makes good business sense. But the flip is, before I move on, short-time client, low margin, maybe you pause and think about it. And it's not that it suddenly isn't the right thing to do. It's just that the course of action you might take could or should be different. So, again, back to the math. You offer the waive the fees because of the right thing to do, but you do it in the full context of the financial implications because this is a business. Also, because your gut doesn't scale. And as your company gets bigger, more and more people might need to understand how you think about this and how to approach it, because you can't be in every conversation and every client decision at some point. So let me walk you through a little bit of the text here. Let's say you really screw something up on a new client with low margins. Maybe the best thing to do, still to be proactive, but is to own it and refer them out to somebody you trust. Imagine you bring in a big client, you're in your first year, you start getting your monthly financials on that account, and the net margins are horrible. It's a new client, they tend to be lower anyway. Maybe even given allowances for that, it's not that great. And you screwed something up. Somebody somewhere goofed something up and it's bad. You got to own it, right? We've talked about that. I don't know if you recall. Let me go back. If you think about that hurdle, if I waive the fee, is that going to increase the likelihood they're going to stay by more than 40%? That's a high bar. Maybe they don't. But maybe the best thing to do is say, you know what? Let me refer you to somebody I really trust and let them take care of it. We goofed this up. We're going to own it, and we're going to make sure you land somewhere where they're really going to take care of you. I'm not saying you should do that in every case. Maybe you waive the fees and you hope for the best. But I'm always an advocate for making these decisions with the full financial context. So at least you know that you're making that decision, right? So you want your culture and your values to help you and your people do the right thing. Again, full stop. This rubric can help them scale beyond the need for you to be in every decision. You can imagine you're a director, your associate director, your team lead, somebody working with your head of finance or your controller or somebody. And the controller, yes, they want us to do the right thing by the client, but they're also watching the bank account. And they want to know there's a little bit of math and thinking behind these decisions, especially as you scale and you devolve this decision-making beyond yourself. So you only pay when the client accepts. Sometimes, this is my experience, sometimes they appreciate the gesture, but they decline your offer. So you go to them, you're like, hey, look, I am not happy at all with the results, with these team changes, whatever it is. I want to waive a month's fee. Sometimes you're like, hey, Larry, I appreciate that. Thank you for this call. But no, let's just keep moving onward and upward. Just don't let it happen again. Okay? Sometimes it happens. But either way, you got to be proactive and don't wait for them to get upset. Now, I'll show you the math, and you could step through this. It's actually really pretty cool how it's like cleans up elegantly as you move through. But basically, this is the math that underpins the little matrix that I showed you when you're thinking about that interplay between client tenure and margins for that account. So give that some thought. Maybe this is another tool that you could use for retention, but also just putting a little math behind what you know is the right business move to make. All right, till the next time.